Welcome aboard Imagination Skyway, your grand podcast tour of the magic. I'm your host, Matthew Kroll, and in today's episode, I have the tremendous honor and privilege of chatting with former president of Walt Disney Imagineering and Imagineering Global Ambassador, Bob Weis. With a career spanning 4 decades at Disney, Bob's work literally extends around the globe as he helped to develop Tokyo Disneyland and Tokyo DisneySea, Shanghai Disney Resort, Disney-MGM Studios, and the refurbishment of Disney California Adventure, a list that only breaks the surface of Bob's impact. In this episode, Bob and I chat about his 40-year career at Walt Disney Imagineering, as well as his new book, Dream Chasing, which you can pick up online or at a bookstore near you starting September 24th. At the end of the show, we'll return to Imagination Central, where I'll share ways in which you can stay connected with Imagination Skyway, how you can discuss this topic with others, and how you can help support and inspire the future of this show. Please remain seated, keep your hands and arms inside the podcast at all times, and enjoy your Grand Circle tour aboard Imagination Skyway. My guest today is not only a prolific Imagineer, but also more broadly, a gifted designer and experienced leader. Starting at Walt Disney Imagineering in 1980, he served lead roles developing Disney-MGM Studios, Tokyo DisneySea, Shanghai Disney Resort, and the transformation of Disney California Adventure. He also served as the president of Walt Disney Imagineering, and more recently, Imagineering Global Ambassador. Beyond Disney, he operated his own firm, serving as a design consultant to the Smithsonian, Disney, DreamWorks, Sony, Fox, the United States Navy, and Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen. In a few short days, readers can also pick up a copy of his new book, Dream Chasing, My 4 Decades of Success and Failure with Walt Disney Imagineering, a book I certainly look forward to reading. And so, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Bob Weis to Imagination Skyway. Bob, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
No, it's great. I'm really excited to have a chance to chat with you, and it's a great time to be doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I obviously want to talk a bit about your book and some of the inspiration for that and discuss your career. But I first want to step back a bit and discuss some of your early interests. And I know that you attended California State Polytechnic University and earned a BS in architecture with additional work in theater. How did you land on this particular combination, which I think is not as orthodox as a lot of other combinations, but how did you land on architecture and theater?
Well, I'll tell you that in high school, theater is about all I did. I'm not good in math. I was not good. I love science. I love history. I love writing, but I love the theater. And so I had a great theater instructor in high school, and he kind of just let us fly wherever we wanted to go. And so I spent most of my time in theater, and then I also worked in theaters around town in different, sort of like summer stock type shows and things like that. I was an actor, director, did musicals, all those things. And so I signed up to study theater at Cal Poly, and I didn't find college theater to be as conducive to me for some reason. It just didn't grab me as much. But I did start doing more design. I started doing more scenic design. And I had a great scenic instructor who said, if you want to do scenic design, it looks like you have a talent for it, but you should probably go study architecture because it's more rigorous. The design training is more rigorous. Then you can come back to theater. So that's why I switched to architecture, but I still did most of my work in the theater in college.
It seems like the combined interests of architecture and theater then, of course, married perfectly to a career at Imagineering. How did that opportunity to join Disney come about?
Yeah, I think without knowing it really, the idea of combining design and story, which is really the core of what Disney is, right? It was a good combination. And I didn't really have a plan. I thought I might try to do theater design. I thought I might try to do film design. But I was literally walking up to the school building one day, and there was a table set up, and and they were recruiting for WED Enterprises. So it's a complete accident. And I had heard about WED Enterprises a little bit because I had worked at Disneyland in the summer, and it was the summer that Space Mountain was being built, 1976. And I asked people, well, who does that? And they said, oh, it's this really secret place called WED Enterprises, and nobody knows anything about it, that kind of thing. And so anyway, they had a table set up. I didn't have a portfolio finished. I went to my locker and I grabbed a bunch of pages from my portfolio. And if I remember right, I had like overalls because I used to wear overalls to the theater because I was always painting and stuff. So I was painted in overalls and I had a half-baked portfolio. But I went and talked to them, and they said, you're the kind of person we're looking for. You combine, design and art and storytelling, and that's what we do. And they were recruiting, and it was very accidental, but a very happy meeting.
That's a very small world, not to use the pun over and over again. So I worked in the parks at Walt Disney World, so I always have to ask for anyone who worked there, what was your role when you worked at Disneyland?
I was an ice cream and popcorn salesman, vendor.
I feel like that's how a lot of the executives and a lot of management get their start doing those similar sorts of roles. So there must be something
I think
to
subsequent to that, I have since come back thinking why that was so formative. And I think what that, when you're out in the park all day, it's one thing to work maybe in one shop or in an attraction or something. But as a outdoor, like a sweeper or a vendor or something like that, I think you end up learning a lot about how the park works because you see it all the time. And you, as a vendor, you would move from, you might be in the Adventureland wagon one day and the Fantasyland wagon another day. So you see the park at different times of the day, different seasons, different parts of it. So I know that Walt Disney used to tell his Imagineers, he used to ask them to go to Disneyland at least once a week and just sit on a bench and watch how it works, so they would not lose the sense of what guests are about. And so, I certainly learned a lot about how parks work from that experience.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. You can't really get that dynamic from reading it in a book or a operating procedure. You just have to
nothing else like being there and experiencing it.
Yeah. So what do you remember about joining WED Enterprises that first year, first few months? What was that dynamic like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I remember I was across the street in more ways than one, because the whole company was focused on Epcot, and the company's fortune was really focused on Epcot, the whole company. And across the street was this little enclave of about 20 people, and they were working on Tokyo Disneyland. And the company had agreed, Cardwalker had agreed to do Tokyo Disneyland on one condition, which was that it had to be based on Walt Disney World's Magic Kingdom, and we were going to give them existing documentation, and we were going to have only a small number of people to help with basically knowledge transfer. And so my boss, Frank Stanek, at the time had put together a team, and he's laughed about it ever since. He always says he put together the fired, the retired, and the newly hired. And he just went around and he had to get people who weren't already engaged on Epcot. And so I was among the newly hired. And we were kind of these young folks who didn't know anything. But the older guys who had been around Imagineering for a while, the Claude Coateses and, Bill Martin and those guys, would say, okay, go find that guy and tell him to do this and this, and and as coordinators, um, I I was in architecture, in set design, in graphics, in interiors, um, area development. I got exposure into all those areas because we would have tons and tons of questions from the Japanese side, the contractors and Oriental Land Company, and we were there to fill in the blanks and to try to so you had to learn really fast. I spent a lot of time at Disneyland. I spent a lot of time at Disney World, took lots of pictures, even though I knew the parks pretty well. Um, Put notebooks together, try to put as much documentation, because if you look at a set of architectural drawings for Disney, that's only the start. There's the models and there's color boards and there's so many other things. So here we were looking to the Japanese side, I'd say, looking like kids that just got out of college, which we were. Um, but we're entrusted with the Disney brand. And so we had to both, I think, hold for what Disney standards represent, which we often had to depict in pictures or descriptions and things like that. We had to figure out the answers to questions that they had, which sometimes we knew, sometimes we had to go back to Glendale for. And we also had to make friends with the Japanese side. We had to bond with them and make sure that we were great partners. So I learned a lot in a very short time. It was about 3 years on Tokyo. Um, but I didn't learn that much about WED because, like I said, everybody was across the street working on Epcot. And by the time I got back, Epcot was finished. So, I had kind of missed, one of the most important periods of WED's history.
Yeah, a very pivotal time. A lot of those second generation Imagineers got their start.
A lot of them got started at Epcot, and our little group got started on Tokyo. And eventually, as we came back, I came back. I had met Marty Sklar when he came over. Well, I'd met him in Glendale, but then I got to know him a little bit better when he came over to Tokyo Disneyland. And I really have Marty to thank for giving me a chance to enter the show design area, because previously I was more in a technical coordination area, and he gave me a chance. And you take a chance, a door opens, you grab it.
Yeah, absolutely you do. And an incredible mentor to have. I find that's common with a lot of other Imagineers who started at that same time period. There were those still first generation Imagineers who worked with Walt directly, or who started working on Disneyland or on even Magic Kingdom, then transferring some of that legacy of Imagineering to that next generation, which we see continue.
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, I was at one point, my office was between Sam McKim on one side of me, one of the great artists of Imagineering, and actually a child actor in Hollywood. He was behind me, and the other side of me was X Atencio, and on the other side of X was Frank Armitage. So I was this kid in the middle of these, greats, and they were all great. It was it. I think about it, and I think, here we were with them, with Claude Coates downstairs, with John Hench, with Marty, and at the time it was like we were all just together, right? It was, I mean, I was certainly younger than them, and I was certainly learning from them, but they weren't well known like they are today, I would say. Today you look back and I think, God, why didn't I ask X about the Haunted Mansion? But we were just working together. It was just kind of like a little company working.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the elements that actually makes it very charming, that there wasn't a lot of this feeling of stardom among Imagineering.
No, it was,
just
and at that time, I mean, I think it mostly still is, but it was a very flat organization, right? And everybody worked together, and nobody, as long as you were working hard, I think everybody respected everybody else.
Yeah, of course. Now you brought up Tokyo, and of course, Tokyo Disneyland was that first major park that you worked on, but
Yeah.
I think a lot of we're going out of chronological order, but sort of sticking topical with Japan. So a lot of Disney fans and a lot of theme park goers in general say that Tokyo DisneySea is perhaps the most beautifully designed or well imagineered, or however you want to describe
Yeah.
it, park in the
Yeah.
world. And from your perspective, because it's not something that you, I think, go in saying we're going to create the most beautiful park in the world, but what were some of the decisions that went into the design of the park that you feel make it so special?
Well, I'll take you back a little bit before
Yeah.
that. Say that when Tokyo Disneyland opened, um, it was not the most beautiful park, the original Tokyo Disneyland. Um, it was a pretty nice copy of Disney World, but it had had budget constraints, time constraints. And I would say the biggest thing people saw about it was it had just huge acres of paving. It just had these huge, wide, if you look at old historical photographs, it had wide paved areas. Um, the, it had not had the care of Disneyland or Disney World with lots of art directors and people. It had a very small team. So I actually got involved in the first 5-year master plan and then stayed on the master plan for Tokyo for quite a long time. But in a very short period of time, Oriental Land Company, in collaboration with WDI, added it was just a sort of a very dramatic cadence of new things. So Big Thunder and Splash Mountain and Star Tours, and they kept increasing the park and adding new things all the time. And every time something was added, the whole area around it got enhanced and enriched. And so over about a 10-year period, they built a gate that was like a powerhouse, with all these e-tickets, incredible area development, dining, entertainment, so that the first gate, Tokyo Disneyland, really became one of the best parks in the world. But it took that time to catch up, right? But it built up to in excess of something like 16 million people. Plus the subway station got built right outside, so it was 20 minutes from Tokyo. And so we spent a lot of time after Disney-MGM Studios was built trying to convince Oriental Land Company that they should do a copy of Disney-MGM Studios next to Tokyo Disney. And we always kind of had a feeling that they didn't like it. But Michael Eisner was very positive about it. He loved the fact that the studio had been a big success in Florida. So we kept trying to adapt it, kept trying to get OLC on board, and they just never really liked it. And we took it as far as we possibly could. And the OLC side is always very polite. So they never really wanted to say they didn't like it. But there was finally a one-on-one meeting with Frank Wells, and they said, no, we don't like it, finally. So they canceled it. They canceled the second part. They just said, okay, stop working on it. And there was a small group of us that had been working on it, and we kind of just refused to stop working on it. And on our own, we spent a couple of weeks, and we knew the challenge was that they didn't like the studio, but OLC did like sort of attractions they could trust that they knew about. And what they really wanted was another Disneyland. And what Michael Eisner felt was important was that it be different than Tokyo Disneyland. So we came up with this idea, well, what if instead of lands based on interesting parts of the world or that kind, what if it's waterways? What if it's bays and harbors and rivers, and we'll put this magical waterway together. It's out on the water anyway. And we'll for OLC, we'll describe it as Disneyland with water, with Disneyland, with waterways. But to Michael Eisner, we'll describe it as completely different because it's all water and it's, so we very quickly got Michael on board and Frank on board and Marty on board with some very sketchy plans for this idea. And they basically said, okay, put it together and go back to OLC. And Mr. Takahashi, who was the head of Oriental Land Company at this time, who had once told me, I don't know what we want, but I'll know it when I see it. He basically said, this is what we want. And this is after like 2 years of working on the studio. Within 4 months or something, I'd say, they loved Tokyo DisneySeas. And so this being Takahashi's gate, you could say, Takahashi-san's park, he had great influence, and he had great influence over the whole team during the early development. And he wanted the best park ever, because they had built, and the challenge was, you're right next to Disneyland, which they had built into this powerhouse. So you had to really work Tokyo DisneySea to be great. And so Oriental Land Company really backed that up. And the team, Steve Kirk and the team who picked it up, Janie Mulholland, who picked it up after I had left the company, built it in such a way that it was just like unprecedented. It was Epcot plus, right? I mean, it was just, and since then, it's just gotten better. The work that we did in the last few years with Fantasy Springs and those things has just made it that much better.
It definitely has, and I'm glad you brought up the studios as well, because we're going to probably spend most of the time talking about the parks in Asia, but I do want to go back a little bit. Like I said, I want to go a little bit out of chronological order here and talk about Disney's Hollywood Studios, or then, of course, Disney-MGM Studios, because one of the things that I admire about the park, and it's something that's written in the Imagineering field guides, which I also love, is the fact that each land in the front of that park pays tribute to specific eras in Hollywood history. You have Hollywood Boulevard, which is focused more on the 1930s, that early years of Hollywood, and then Sunset Boulevard, which of course was added later, focusing on that wartime era. Echo Lake on the rise of suburbia, a little bit more about the 1950s. And there's also this, more broadly, in the way it was built, this blend or blurred line between the real side of Hollywood, the real city that you could go and visit, and the sort of romanticized perception of the industry at large. And especially from a design perspective, that is likely challenging to navigate between the real and the perception. So how did you balance those two sides of the park?
Well, it was such a fast process, and I was very inexperienced, but Marty was dealing with Michael Eisner and Frank Wells coming in, and they wanted everything to go at once. They wanted Disneyland developed, they wanted Captain EO, they wanted Star Wars, they wanted to start Paris. They just wanted everything. And so and they wanted things fast. And so Marty had to introduce a lot more new creative players into the mix, because I think he wanted them to see that there was a sort of a variety of people, that it wasn't all senior people, that there was a whole range. And so I would literally happen to be in the right place when Marty was trying to figure out, okay, Michael wants to do he wants to do an entertainment pavilion for Epcot. So Bob, can you go lead a charrette on that? Literally, that's, and it started out as an entertainment pavilion, roughly where between Horizons and where Horizons was now Space, and Guardians is. But it was, early on we said, one thing about entertainment at that time, it was a kind of a simpler thing. There wasn't a huge games business. There was kind of music and radio and TV and movies. It was kind of easy to break it down into three pieces. And we came up with a pavilion that did that. We came up with the early idea of a great movie ride and some kind of interactive television show piece and some kind of sound-oriented piece. And then Michael got excited, and then he said, well, Jeffrey Katzenberg and the studio, they're going to ramp up production. So maybe they can do some of that production in Florida. Why don't we build some sound stages on the other side of this thing, outside Epcot? And that kind of is where it all started, as it became this pavilion with some sound stages connected. And then as the ideas quickly generated, I'm talking about several weeks, really, that's all. We quickly looked at it and said, this is too big for Epcot. It's really should be its own thing. And so even when you back then, when you had Michael Eisner's enthusiasm, which we did, we had this great enthusiasm. You still had the company investing in lots of stuff all over Paris, everything. And so we were still held to a pretty tight budget. And the strategic planners originally thought, well, it'll be a half-day park for the day people first get here and they can't check in, or the day they are going to leave, whatever. So we never broke this idea that we were going to be a little park, and so they kind of put us down on a site that was pretty tight, and the budget was pretty tight. So we said, well, we're never going to be able to do what Epcot looks like, in scope or size or that kind of thing. So we pretty much early on said there's really two lands. It makes sense. We'll do one themed land that is the different, exactly as you described them, but the different aspects of whatever anybody considers to be golden age of Hollywood, a imaginary place like Main Street USA. So an immersive kind of world, which we can probably do in a small area. We can't do a giant bunch of them. And then on the other side of the wall, in effect, everything will be a soundstage or a production facility, and we'll use what John Hench used to call the avocado sandwich, which is this sort of brown, green, teal kind of striped, which started in the Burbank Disney Studios, and they've actually done more of it since we did it. So we kind of tried to say, once you pass through the studio gate, it's going to look like studio, and it's going to be behind the scenes, and then when you're not there, it'll look like this old sort of golden age of Hollywood. And that's the way we divided up the budget and the program, and we said you can do anything you want in the kind of fantasy side, or the golden age side, like you can do the Great Movie Ride and you can do things like that. But that if you go into the studio side, it should be more like working animators, working production, those kinds of things. That's how we opened. And then, the studio tour had quite a path. It opened. It did twice the attendance it was supposed to do in the first year. It was really strained. Everything about it was strained with the attendance. Too many people. We quickly added everything we could, and then we quickly added Sunset Boulevard, Tower of Terror, Muppets, and it's just continued on a very fast expansion route. And then when Star Wars came along and it was decided to put Star Wars in the studio, it was clear that the one thing that had never really clicked, and I think that I would say this is for Universal or Disney, is the dream of a whole lot of Florida production never really happened. And so even though there were some great things filmed backstage, the sound stages were never really used as much as you would hope, and the backstage wasn't used as much as you would hope. So it made a lot of sense to just adapt the park and do something different with all that space. So the first step of that was putting Midway Mania into a couple of the sound stages. That totally made sense. And then the back lot, which really, if you think about it, is a lot of land with a few sets in it. So that became the master plan for Galaxy's Edge. And then the place in between there, which was right in front of Midway, became the obvious place to put a big Toy Story land. So so the whole park became more about the stories that come out of the film business and that. I feel really great that that all that worked out. As one of the original designers, I feel great that that's all there. I also feel great that like Hollywood Boulevard and Sunset are still there because they're kind of part of the original, and they still work. They're even more vibrant today than they were before. And even the Great Movie Ride, which, I'm sure there's a big online fan group for the Great Movie Ride, especially people who work in it. especially people who worked in it, right? They loved it. Um, but it was ready for a refresh, and I think Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway was a great way to refresh that ride and still keep the Chinese theater and keep, some of the original aspects of it. So um, people ask you, the parks change, and I think I I got this from Marty too, and from just looking at pictures of Disneyland, you look at how much Walt changed Disneyland and just in his lifetime. And Marty was always a proponent of saying the we're stewards over the parks, but the parks are not museums. They're not here to just stay the way they are. They're here to be adapted to the current way of thinking. And so, we definitely did that on the studio.
Yeah, and it's honestly a incredible park. There's a lot of nostalgia that
Yeah.
comes into play when Disney fans think about when their respective period growing up. It just
Yeah,
attached
yeah,
to
yeah.
that childhood memory. But it's
Yeah,
a philosophy I agree with.
I went down last year for the 35th anniversary, and it was really fun. They did stuff with cast, and I got to meet a lot of cast members who'd worked there since it opened. Some of them I know, but like there's an indie there that was part of the original show, still in the show, still trains the new indies. Uh, but as much as we have nostalgia for things like, Primetime Cafe and things that are part of the original, it's great to have all the great new stuff too, and it's great to have the things that are classics, and it's also great to have the new stuff.
Yeah, absolutely a
I think the
perfect
park I
blend.
think the park really didn't, in my view, you sort of look at these things and where are they, I redid DCA. You kind of look at them as a moment in time all the time. And I'd say for me, the studio tour finally felt comfortable to me, um, once Tower of Terror was finished, and Sunset. Then and certainly got better and better after that. But it finally kind of felt like, okay, we've got enough. You got Muppets over there, you got Tower of Terror over here. We had Star Tours open. This was all in the first few years, 5 years, I guess. It finally felt like, okay, this feels like a full park, right?
Yeah, it definitely is a full day park now. It's
Now it is
packed,
definitely.
packed with attractions, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's certainly a full day park at this point. We brought up the California Adventure refurbishment, which I know you left the company for a period of years, worked on your own firm, came back, and early on started working on the refurbishment or revitalization of California Adventure. And having sort of worked on both new parks and, as you even referenced, with the continued expansion or evolution of Disney's Hollywood Studios and then Disney California Adventure, which do you find to be, I don't want to say easier, but do you find it's more complicated to build something from scratch, or to take an existing park and figure out how to evolve it into its next phase?
Um, I just say I'll cop out and just say they're equal challenges, and they're just radically different. Um, and I sort of, when they first asked me to work on DCA, I didn't want to work on it. And I kind of turned my nose up and I wanted to do something else. But by the time I got into it and started looking at the challenges of it, huge challenges, brand challenges, audience challenges, I really kind of fell in love with it. There's just like, because it was so hard, it's just like this thing that didn't work. The audience didn't like it. Not even the cast liked it. The people don't like to work there. And so Jay Rasulo was head of parks at the time, and we sat down. I sat down with Jay, and he said, we had a big number that Imagineers had put together to fix it all. And he gave me a slightly smaller number, and he said, if you can get it to that number, we'll do it, even though it doesn't really make financial sense. Um, so I got it to that number, and we started working. And I think we got to, I remember people saying, the DCA would never work, just, and I got together with the the people that were operating at the time. And I said, this is really not an expansion project. This is a campaign. It's a campaign to change people's perception of what this park is. And so some of the key things I think we did that are maybe not known are we did a thing called the Blue Sky Cellar where we put a basically a preview center in, and we opened up the process. We showed guests what we were doing. So when they were walking through hundreds of feet of construction fences, at least they knew something was coming. We were doing it for a reason. And I think slowly by opening things as they got done, as soon as it was done, we did it, we got the guests on our side, and you could see guest perceptions changing. And I remember previous management had said, no one will ever go to DCA at night. No one will ever go to a restaurant, a sit-down restaurant at DCA again. And when we opened World of Color, people were clamoring to get into DCA. My father called me. He didn't even know what DCA was. He said, how do I get in to see this show, World of Color? Where is it? How do I get a ticket? You couldn't get in. You couldn't get into the show. The place was packed. Every restaurant was oversold. It was amazing. And and I think, changing Buena Vista Street, the main entrance, and doing Cars Land, those were gigantic. But I think what people don't realize is it really was after World of Color where you kind of realized something's happening here. And eventually, when it was all done, what you find with DCA is by having the two parks being able to each function, on their own, instead of one really in the shadow of the other, the entire economics of Disneyland Resort changes. It's not a drag on the resort anymore, and it helps downtown Disney, it helps the hotels, it helps everything. It takes pressure off of Disneyland. So the gratification that you get from solving a really, really hard, complex problem, I'd say, is as good as going to Shanghai and being able to have a whole new layout and start over and try some things that have never been done before. I wouldn't say it's one or the other. I'd say they both have tremendous satisfaction about them, but they're very different. You're right about they're very different problems. They're very, and you have to think about. Everybody said, well, the problem is it's California. Why would anybody build a park in California? So we have to change the name, and we have to take out all the California elements. And I just never believed that. I never believed it mattered. I felt what was a problem was it didn't have a sense of love that guests have for Disneyland, and a sense of, people didn't take it. It felt like it was insincere. And Disneyland is very sincere, right? I mean, so we did things like, plant 1,200 trees. We changed graphics that were sort of like inside jokes. We changed them. We put sincere names in. We did Buena Vista Street so the entryway didn't look like a mini mall, like a power mall or something like that. You did a lot of things because I think, and I respect every team that does so. Just like I said, we tore out a lot of the stuff I built at the studio, and we tore out a lot of stuff that other teams built at DCA, but I don't fault them. They were intentionally trying to build a sort of anti-Disneyland. And that was their goal. And it didn't work. So it's okay. It doesn't mean they didn't try to do something interesting. It just means it didn't work for this audience because of Disneyland. But like things like I did insist that we take out all the California letters that were in the entryway, those big concrete letters. And yet I felt they were a landmark. They were an important thing to preserve. So I made this deal with the Sacramento State Fair, and they wanted them. And so we carefully took them out. We moved them all up to Sacramento. and they installed them there, so they're still there. So I have respect for things we do that I think are important, but at the same time, like Marty said, we're not a museum, so you know you tear stuff down if it's not working.
Yeah, California Adventure is a great example of why that philosophy works and why it's important to keep things relevant for audiences and
Well, I think
guests.
there's also a sense of scope. It's the same thing I said about the studio working. Once I thought we had Tower of Terror and Sunset. We a lot of the charm of of DCA comes from Buena Vista Street and Cars Land and opening up the vistas. If these parks, if they're built too small, they don't work. They don't have the scope that you need. And that's exactly what we ended up doing, which is underway in Paris right now. In the second park in Paris was it just felt like it was a crammed in bunch of buildings around sort of a studio theme with a lot of asphalt. And so a lot of what we are doing is opening that up, building a big spine all the way out to a lake, really making it a prettier, more impactful environment, including new attractions. But new attractions is not enough. It's also what makes a park a park, what makes a Disney park a park.
And that's a great segue. I want to get to your book, but first I have to, while we could talk, I could ask tons of questions about specific projects. Of course, need to ask about Shanghai because that was such a tremendous project in so many different ways. I also had the privilege of getting to chat with Doris Hardoon a couple of years ago about Shanghai, and she had some really incredible stories to share. But for you obviously you get this call from Bob Iger, it said, and he's talking about the future of Disney being in China and embarking on a new park in Shanghai or in mainland China. So what was your initial reaction to that phone call, and how did you think through
Well,
developing that park?
I had gone to China the first time in 1983, and when Tokyo Disneyland finished, and China was a destitute, poor, dusty place at that time. And then I went back. First time I went back was when I started Shanghai Disneyland, and you realize, my God, China's like New York, right? I mean, it's like, anywhere in the world except times 10, right? So we realized it was time to um, reinvent Disneyland for a new audience. We realized when Bob said, authentically Disney, distinctly Chinese, we wanted Chinese artists and designers on the team integrated with us, writers integrated with us. Doris helped a lot with that. And we wanted to talk through like a lot of guest reaction. We did tons of focus groups. We came away thinking, nobody really reacts to the Old West here. It doesn't seem like, just because it's part of traditional Disneyland, it doesn't seem important. Train doesn't seem important to this audience to have, and it's a lot of money. Just Main Street, just because it's Walt's memory of his town, doesn't seem like enough. It seems like it has to have a lot more character-driven things to welcome guests into the park. Doris came up with this idea of making the hub, instead of just a circle with some trees, um, to make it a land in itself and bring some of the rides out, which are traditionally in Fantasyland, like Dumbo and Carousel, out so people see rides right when they come in, to bring downtown Disney closer. A lot of these things were kind of radical. And the first time that I had a meeting with Bob about it, um, I thought, oh, this is kind of radical. And he was like, sure, we should do all of that stuff. It was his. You have to remember that Shanghai was Bob's first and only park that was his, right? So the other parks, Hong Kong had already started, the redo of the expansion of DCA was an expansion, but it was already there. This was from the ground up. Bob Iger. And Bob Iger worked very close with us, um, and encouraged us to always think outside the box. And so I had great team land designers, and I brought in Scott Drake, who I thought had a kind of a new vision for a kind of different Tomorrowland. There was a lot of concern that a Tomorrowland would be hard to do in Shanghai, which is sort of is Tomorrowland. But we decided to do Tron instead of Space Mountain. We decided it was important that it be bikes, not cars, that it be outside the building and inside the building. We embarked on a massive redo of Pirates because Pirates was well known in China, but it was only well known from the movies, not from the attraction. And so here's these giant scale films. How do you do that? So we decided it was time to redo Pirates, but for a new generation, and so bit by bit we pieced these things together, and we ended up with 720 plus people here in Glendale working on this new park, and we had made decisions that made it the most sophisticated technological park we'd ever produced. And that's one thing if you said, okay, we're going to go build it next to Tokyo Disneyland, like Tokyo DisneySea, where we knew the contractor environment, we knew the skill levels, all that stuff. We were going into a place that we had never worked before, and with contractors and architects that didn't know Disney at all. And so the next journey was how to figure out how to do that in that construction environment. And I'll tell you right now, it was kind of a miracle to get it done.
Yeah, incredible. And we catch glimpses of that in the Imagineering story, and again spoke at length with Doris about it as well. So heard some great stories there. I of course want to make sure to talk about your book, because that's a big reason for us to chat today. So you've got this new book, Dream Chasing, coming onto shelves September 24th, so right around the corner. A two-part question for this: what prompted you to write this almost memoir, which now that we're talking, I'm even more excited to dive into some of the stories you have? And second part is, what's the impact you're hoping the book will have on readers?
Well, it's less of a memoir than it is a kind of a storyline about, and Dream Chasing turned out to be a good title, because when I think about, we have an expression which is to follow your dreams, and I think we don't follow our dreams. We have to really chase them if we want them to happen. And I like the idea that people could learn from this book or read in this book about how hard these things are to get done, and that they're not, people don't just sit around and think about them and then go build them. Like Shanghai, like I said, it was not only hard to figure it out, but also hard to figure out how to build it. Things like the Tower of Terror start as one thing, and they become something else, and they eventually get to where, but there might be a 5-year development period on something to try to get it to where it wants to be, and it comes on and off. And some things like Disney's America, which I wrote extensively about, were really good ideas, but for a lot of good reasons, they never happen. So I'm hoping that what the book will do is to encourage people to have their own dreams and be willing to chase them. In the case of Disney, you have to, not only do you have to chase these dreams and stay with them, but you got to take a whole team with you. You got to get a lot of people to want to do it, to deliver something. So I'm hoping that the book will encourage people with their own dreams to say, never stay, you can't get there, always stay with it. And I even say at the very end, I hope that people who may have been inspired by the book to do that with their company or with their own work or their own whatever things, that aspirations they have, that they'll write me and tell me about them. I want to kind of start an encouraging network here of people that are encouraged to dream big and then follow those dreams or chase those dreams. So that's my aspiration. I've had I've had a short amount of time so far. We had a we had some books at D23 that I got to sign, and people were incredibly excited, generous. Big fans of Disney, big fans of Imagineering. I think it's a very backstage book. It's thanks to uh, things like Leslie Iwerk's documentary and stuff like that. It's opened up the opportunity to talk about things backstage. I think it's pretty backstage. It goes through a lot of the development cycle that I think a lot of has never been seen before. So I hope it'll be revealing, and I hope it'll also be encouraging to people who want to pursue careers in design or entertainment, technology, innovation. Hopefully that.
Well, as I said, I look forward to reading it as well. So it'll definitely be something I pick up in a few days' time. And
there's also an audio book. I'll do my ad.
Oh, even
now.
better.
Also an audio book. I just finished reading the audio book. I read it. It took me like 26 sessions. So so they're editing the audio book right now. It has a nice musical score that was written by Disney Editions, and Disney Editions is really great to work with. I love working with the publishing group, and we've got another project we're talking about doing. There's more books to come. I've discovered that I really love books. As hard as they are to do, I love them. So I'm going to do more.
Good. That's exactly what I want to hear. And now I obviously need to pick up the audiobook as well, because that's, especially if you've narrated it, that makes it even more.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. It's a whole new experience, but I did it. I went through it.
Awesome. I love that. Well, I will make sure everyone knows. Obviously, just go to your bookstore. I'll link to places that readers can pick this up wherever they prefer to get their books or audiobooks. But Bob, this has been an absolute pleasure and an honor to have you chat with me. So I appreciate you taking the time to be on the show today.
Oh, I so appreciate it, Matt. Great to meet you, and encourage all your audience to check out the book and enjoy it.
I certainly will. Welcome back to Imagination Central. As you disembark, please remember to remain fully seated until the podcast comes to a complete stop, then gather your belongings and watch your head and step as you exit. I once again want to extend a tremendous thank you to Bob Weis and to Disney for today's episode. Be sure to pick up a copy of Bob's new book, Dream Chasing: My 4 Decades of Success and Failure with Walt Disney Imagineering, as well as his novel, Ghost Dog, which is especially perfect for fans of the Haunted Mansion. I will link to both in the description of this episode. If you haven't done so already, by the way, be sure to create a free Imagination Skyway account over at patreon.com/Imagination Skyway. I'm gradually turning this into a one-stop shop for Imagination Skyway content, podcast episodes, and more, so be sure to create a free account there or consider signing up for one of our paid subscription options for even more surprises. In fact, if you already have an account or sign up today, be sure to leave your thoughts about today's discussion directly on this episode in the Patreon app. Remember, you can also engage with the show on social media by searching for Imagination Skyway on your favorite app or heading to imaginationskyway.com. And if you're ready to book your next Disney vacation or you have questions as you prepare for your next Disney trip, be sure to contact our travel partners and sponsors at KMV Travel. It's a boutique travel agency that helps families plan personalized vacations and create unforgettable memories on land and at sea. Kelly and her team are an amazing resource, and I encourage you to reach out to them to take advantage of their expert knowledge, their world-class service, and complimentary booking support by heading to kmvtravel.com/skyway, or simply find KMV Travel on social media and let them know Imagination Skyway sent you. Thank you so much for riding aboard Imagination Skyway, and remember, if we can dream it, we can do it. And remember, as Bob says, we should chase our dreams.